All right, we begin with a historic week in Washington. The House gearing up for the first televised hearings in the impeachment probe of President Trump. Now, a reminder, this is all centered around the president's July 25th phone call to Ukraine, where a whistleblower and several other officials have said the president abused his power. So I want to bring in Karen Travers at the White House, and we have Catherine Faulders in our D.C. bureau. And Catherine, I'll start with you because I want you to explain how all of this is going to go down. And also the Republicans want some very interesting witnesses to come forward.
Yeah, so these public hearings are going to happen on Wednesday and on Friday. You have three of these top officials, the former Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, the State Department official George Kent, and then Bill Taylor, a top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine. You see them all there. We'll hear from Yovanovitch later this week on Friday. But look, there's two sides to this. Republicans, they're hoping that those three people, they're going to try to undermine their credibility. They're going to say, look, they don't have firsthand knowledge of this call. They didn't talk to the president directly. But what Democrats want out of these public hearings, they want the American people to hear for themselves on camera before millions of people these three accounts. And what they're hoping to show is that we have this whistleblower complaint, and these three are corroborating that whistleblower's account and providing more details specifically about Ukraine policy. But what we will hear a lot about is the concerns raised by these people of the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, back-channeling this Ukraine policy through the State Department.
And Karen, it's interesting because the president just wants the Republicans to say that this call was perfect.
And they're not all getting in line behind him on that. The president, Kimberly, insists that the phone call was perfect. He did nothing wrong and there should not be an impeachment inquiry. But it was notable to hear Congressman Max Thornberry tell ABC's Martha Raddatz on This Week that the call, in his view, was inappropriate, but he doesn't believe it was impeachable. So, yes, there were some problems, but no, this doesn't rise to an impeachable offense. The president did not like that. And he said Republicans should not fall into what he calls a fool's trap and say that. He insists there was nothing wrong. The other thing that's interesting from the president today, Kimberly, is him saying that the transcripts released so far by House Democrats have been doctored. There have been 8 current or former administration officials whose transcripts of their closed-door testimony have been released to the public. No Republican lawmakers have taken issue with what has been released, and those witnesses themselves were able to look at that before they were released publicly. The president's the only one saying without evidence that the transcripts were doctored.
Yeah, and Karen, what's going to be the counter-programming by the White House on Wednesday when all of these hearings begin?
Well, you know, the White House has insisted that they don't need a war room, they don't need a strategy, that the president himself is the war room and he is his top defender. The president will have a very busy day here at the White House on Wednesday. He's welcoming Turkey's President Erdogan for a series of meetings, and they're also going to hold a press conference. So the president may be tuned in for the morning hours of the impeachment hearing, but in the afternoon he will be occupied here. But it does mean we will have a chance to ask him questions about what was taking place just a couple miles away up on Capitol Hill.
All right. Well, everyone will be watching. I want to thank Karen Travers at the White House and Catherine Faulders in our D.C. bureau. Thank you so much. And guys, make sure to keep it here for full coverage of the impeachment hearing starting Wednesday morning. All right. So we move to that tragic story out of northern Mexico. An American Mormon family, 3 mothers and 6 children dead after being ambushed by a drug cartel. And in an ABC News exclusive, the family of the victims, including a hero boy who rescued some of his siblings, spoke to our Tom Yamas about what he went through. So take a listen.
They just started hitting the car at first, like with a bunch of bullets. Just started shooting rapidly at us.
Devin walking 14 miles for several hours to get help, not sure if the cartel hitmen were coming for him next, telling us about his painful thoughts along the way.
If there was anybody else out there trying to shoot me or following me, or about my mom and my 2 brothers that died.
Devin telling us the last thing his mother said.
To get down right now, she was trying to pray to the Lord, and she's trying to start the car up to get out of there. Afterwards, they got us out of the car, and they just got us on the floor, and then they drove off.
All right, and our Tom Yamas joins me now. Tom, there's just no words for how sad and painful it is to listen to him share his story.
Right, just senseless violence.
Yeah.
You know, one extended family, but 3 different cars, 9 Americans, as you said, 3 mothers and 6 children. And then the surviving children, there's 8 of them. One of them is a baby, an infant that will never remember this. There's another baby, too. But I mean, there's about 5 kids that will never forget this. It'll haunt them forever, including Devin and his brave story he just told us. His sister Mackenzie, just 9 years old, she also walked for a long while. And it's sad and senseless, and the family's now left Mexico. They've been there, their ancestors really for about a century. They were there way before the drug cartels were there. And they, according to them, had cut out their own little utopia in this part of Mexico. They lived their life there. They were able to practice their faith there. And then this happened to them. And they think they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The father had concerns going back 2 years ago about the safety there. He wishes, obviously, he would have moved them out. But now he moved out. And then over the weekend, about 100 of his family members joined him in this caravan. And they left and they crossed the border. And now they're in Arizona.
What does the father say about all of this? Like, how do you even begin to wrap your mind around it? Because they're sitting there and they're keeping themselves together, you know? What does he say?
I think they're still in shock. I mean, you have to be. These were families that were living together, that were traveling together, that were going to go see families in a neighboring Mexican state, in Chihuahua. And then they happen upon this horrific violence, you know? And it's their take that the Mexican drug cartels mistook their SUVs for another rival drug gang and just started firing upon them. And then when it was too late, they decided to torch one of the cars. They had killed the mother in another car. And then you heard Devin say there that the alleged sicarios, these hitmen from the drug cartels, pulled them out and put the kids on the ground. So at some point they realized, we've killed innocent women and children. We're not going to kill the rest of the kids. And that's when Devin takes off to meet his family. The father has very strong views about Mexico. He hopes that President Trump helps out. Mexico just announced that they've asked the FBI for help in this. But you got to remember, Kimberly, after this happens, whoever did this, the killers, had hours to get away. This is very remote land. It's all desert, mountains. There's one road in and out. It's very hard to get to. It took us 6 hours to get there.
Wow.
One expert told us the closest military base is 3 hours. There's a handful of police officers regularly that patrol there. The family was telling us that the people who run the checkpoints are the drug cartels. So they imagine trying to go home. There's a checkpoint, and it's a drug cartel.
Right.
That's the way they were living for several years because they were able to live, if this makes sense, sort of among this violence because it wasn't affecting their community. Every now and then they had violent incidents, but for the most part they were living their lives until this happened, and this was the red line.
It's so interesting because you said everyone's leaving now. Do they know where they start their lives again?
It's interesting. They have roots all over the United States, in Missouri, in Utah, in North Dakota, Arizona. They're going to spread out. The father says his life is turned upside down now. He's lost his wife, his 2 sons. They've had to move from the place they've lived for decades, what they called home, even though they had dual citizenship. So he's not sure. And the kids, they loved living there because it is a life where, you know, you have hundreds of acres and you're able to be a kid if you want. Outside of that, though, outside of that sort of perfect living is the drug cartel violence. Devin telling me he's never lived in the state, so he doesn't know what to expect.
Incredibly traumatic.
Yeah.
Thank you for the reporting and the updates.
Thanks, Kimberly. Thanks for having me.
Terrific. Thank you. And guys, we're going to move overseas to the fresh clashes in Hong Kong. As we've been reporting, pro-democracy protesters holding massive demonstrations for months, fighting for their autonomy from mainland China. But things taking an even uglier turn today when one protester was shot by police and another man set on fire. So I want to bring in Julia McFarland in our London bureau to discuss all of this. Julia, it seems like things are just getting worse. It feels like we're reaching a point of no return when people are in critical condition.
Kimberly, exactly. Over the course of these last 6 months, what we've seen in Hong Kong is we have seen this war of attrition, really, between the both sides get progressively worse and reaching new levels of violence. We had, at the start of October, the first time police used live ammunition on a protester. We then saw last week the first death of a protester, and the anger that followed that really stoked fears that violence in the following days, over last weekend and certainly today, would escalate. That is unfortunately what we have seen this morning in Hong Kong. The first incident you mentioned, police shooting a young student protester in the torso at point blank range. The video circulating of that was live streamed on Facebook. It has gone all over the world. Police have responded to that in a press conference earlier today. They said that the officer said he feared for his life. In a separate incident, a pro-Beijing protester was confronting a group of Hong Kong demonstrators. He can be heard saying, "You're not from China." And as a sort of fracas ensued, someone just out of shot douses him in a flammable liquid and sets him on fire. Now, the protester who is shot by police, he's undergone surgery. He's now in a stable condition. But that other protester who was set on fire, he is currently critical in the hospital.
Yeah, it's unbelievable to see the images. And I just want you to remind us what the people are fighting for, because in the beginning, when this started in the summer, it was about that extradition bill.
Exactly. So what started all this off is that contentious extradition bill. That was something that a lot of people feared would mean that China could extradite religious dissidents, political opposition figures and activists, and have them face the dubious Chinese judicial system. Hong Kong, of course, has a very separate, free and fair, internationally renowned judicial system based on the British model with international judges, completely different from the very, very murky judicial system in China. Now, that's what sparked a lot of these protests initially. But that bill it was suspended by the Hong Kong authorities. It was then cancelled by Carrie Lam and the Hong Kong authorities. But now these protests have kind of been galvanized by a lot of this alleged police brutality. And a lot of that alleged brutality has been caught on camera and has been widely documented. Another incident today, a police motorcycle was filmed slamming into a crowd of protesters. That incident was called up by Amnesty International, who today said, look, these are not police tactics. This is not crowd suppression. These are serious issues. These are anti-democratic and endangering life. And this goes beyond any kind of police defensive or crowd control tactics. There are some real issues here.
Yeah, Julia, and no end in sight. I want to thank you for the updates right there in our London bureau. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And guys, we move to the weather. Winter is coming, but for some parts of the U.S., it feels like winter is already here. Like in Chicago, brutal, record-breaking sub-zero temperatures this week. And I want to bring in our Alex Perez, who's right there on the ground, freezing in Chicago. Alex, good to see you. You know, I used to live in Chicago. The wind chill is no joke, but it still seems early for November.
Yeah, Kimberly, if this kind of looks like Siberia to you, I can tell you it certainly feels like it. And you're right, it is early in the season to be feeling these cold temperatures. According to our weather team, a big chunk of the country is dealing with these below average temperatures right now. Now, this is the same spot where we did a couple of live shots here for you in the summer, and I want you to take a look at that harbor over there. Well, when we did it in the summer, it was filled with boats and it was pretty looking. Well, now it just looks cloudy, snowy, and cold. And that's what we're dealing with here in Chicago, in the plains, in the Midwest. And this cold, this snow, these icy conditions creating a lot of problems, not only on the roadways, but also at the airports. We want to show you some video, cell phone video, of a horrifying, scary moment at Chicago's O'Hare Airport earlier this morning when an American Airlines plane skidded off the runway after landing. It's believed that plane had that problem because of icy conditions. Now, luckily, no one was injured and all 38 people on board were able to safely deplane. But you can imagine some scary moments, and that incident just a reminder of how dangerous this weather, these conditions can be as we head into winter, even though it's still only November and fall. Kimberly?
Yes, and I think dangerous is the right word, because people have to remember to be safe. Like, you can have some effects from being out in this weather too long.
Yeah, and actually, you know, even cold weather veterans like Chicagoans and other people in the Midwest or the Northeast forget, you know, summertime comes and you forget that when you are outside in this weather, you have to layer up, you have to cover those extremities. I might look a little silly here because you can barely see me, but you have to cover up when there's wind blowing, when there's snow. And of course, you know, authorities, doctors, every year tell us the same thing. Try to limit your time outside, limit your exposure to the cold weather. And if you can, just stay inside. Don't come out at all. It's only November. We got a long way to go, so we got to start reminding people now.
Yes, stay inside. That's what you got to do. Stay warm, Alex. Thank you so much for the updates. We appreciate it. And guys, today we celebrate Veterans Day because we appreciate their service in protecting our country. And if you didn't know, nearly 200,000 military members transition back to civilian life every single year. But this transition can be difficult. In 2017, over 6,100 vets took their lives. The highest rate of suicide was vets between the ages of 18 to 34 years old. And while unemployment for vets is at a nearly 20-year low, many still need a helping hand on their post-military journey. So I'm joined today by Dre Popov, a former Marine who's the executive director of Veterans Rebuilding Life, a nonprofit of combat veterans helping fellow combat veterans, and Frank Rivera, an Air Force vet who heads up the Department of Military and Veteran Affairs at the New York Institute of Technology. So guys, I'm so happy you're here today. We really, really appreciate it. You guys both found that resources were lacking when you returned home, and Frank, specifically for you, it had to deal with college resources.
Yes, ma'am.
So how are you dealing with that now?
The way that we address it at the New York Institute of Technology is we really try to welcome them here and include them into everything that we're doing. So at an institutional level, we're becoming more military inclusive, having them more involved with special events, and empowering the students through the Student Veterans of America's organization that we have there. Giving them the opportunity to kind of create their own narrative has really been beneficial to them. And I think it rewards them for the experience that they've had previously.
Yeah, it's amazing work. And Dre, for you, you noticed this disturbing trend, veterans being heavily medicated to deal with the trauma left from combat. So how did you decide you're going to do something about this, and what exactly are you doing?
That's correct. The issue is that more than 20 veterans a day commit suicide, and the only solution that's being provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs and other government institutions are heavy doses of prescription pills, the very pills that these vets often use to commit suicide. I myself lost more Marines when they returned from their combat tours of duty to suicide than the war itself.
Wow.
In 2014, I believe, the nationwide that had taken place, there were more suicides of veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan than there were casualties of war. And this is the longest war in American history, so that's not acceptable.
It's unbelievable. There's something that your organization deals with. It's called combat guilt. That, you know, the veterans have when they return, but your organization helps them overcome that in a special way. So I want you to tell us about that.
Absolutely. So yeah. we have a kind of a saying in our organization that when a veteran helps a child, the child helps the vet. A soldier saves a child, the child saves the vet. We have a program called Project 360. It's a holistic integration program for exclusively for vets, designed by vets. And it will provide veterans humanitarian missions where they can actually assist children in the very countries that they fought in. Very often the source of extreme PTSD comes from combat-related guilt. This is a collateral damage, a child that gets caught in the crossfire. Accidents happen in war, and there's nothing they can do about it now. So they have to live with this memory, and it's something they generally don't want to talk about because of feelings of shame or guilt,
wow.
Which ends up becoming a self-destructive cycle for the vet. So when we pair them with these humanitarian missions, we work with a number of Doctors Without Borders and so forth, they are able to save a child in this very country. And we tell them, like, you couldn't do anything about it then when you were engaged in war. You were young, you had to do your job. Bad things happen in war. But you can do something about this now. You can save this child now.
So you sort of transmute it into something positive.
Correct. And it's from the same places, the same regions. Often the vets will return to the scenes of battlefields that they had served in years prior. And we've seen a 96% success rate with that. The vets that often successfully complete these humanitarian missions become volunteers in our organization. They become staff members. They help the next vets that come through the door. Yeah, it's been a very successful program. We're happy to do it.
It's amazing. Why do you guys, Frank, why do you think it's hard for veterans to transition back to civilian life? What is it that normal civilians take for granted that we don't know vets are experiencing?
I think it's a support system. When we look at it, the data shows that 80% of veterans don't go to school where they're from. So that lack of that family, the ability to just drop your kids off with your parents, or just that traditional support structure you don't necessarily have. And then there's the whole other kind of feeling of not relating to other people. When you have a completely different life experience at 25, it's difficult to relate back to those folks that are 22, 18. And just feel like you're supposed to be there. From classroom discussions, you come from a different point of view, or you take a different perspective. It's a difficult thing. Also, dealing with those kind of moral injuries that we were talking about earlier. If you're still suffering on the inside, it's hard for you to kind of open up and relate and communicate those feelings, especially when you feel like that outsider. So we do our best I can to really make them feel inclusive at New York Institute of Technology, but on a grander scale, I think that it needs to become more important for other organizations to really address that specific issue. How can I make these veterans feel a little bit better? How can I ease that transition? And what kind of support can I give them that will really help them achieve their individualized success?
Yeah, and if people don't know about these organizations, a lot of times the vets only have their families, their loved ones. So what can families do to help support the vets when they return home, if that's all the vet has? Right. That's the only people that are in their life.
It's the truth.
What can they do?
We often have mediation services that provide a safe space for the families, including the children and the spouses, to come together with the veteran and discuss how they felt when the veteran went away to war and returned a changed person. Because it affects the entire family when one vet goes to war. The stressors, often the veteran doesn't want to discuss the experiences that they served with overseas. They don't want to be seen like that by their children, but this will just lead to isolation. Often veterans are looking for that sense of purpose that they had when they were in the military. What they did mattered out there. So when they come back and they're unemployed, they don't have the ability to sustain their families anymore. They lose that sense of purpose, and they can start a self-destructive cycle that can end in suicide.
Yeah.
The way that I address it, and at an institutional level that we try to address it, is getting them more involved into the events that we plan. We recently screened Almost Sunrise, which is a movie that covers the moral ambiguities of war, with a panel discussion after. And really, while our students are aware to some degree of moral injury and the effects that it can cause, having their spouses, their dependents, and just traditional civilians kind of really participate in that event, it brings to light some of those issues, and it makes them more prepared to address them. So at an institutional level, whenever we're doing anything, we really want to include the spouses, include those kids and the dependents, because they were a part of that fight. They did sacrifice a lot for that service member to be able to do their job in a very competent manner.
Yeah, you guys are amazing. I just want to thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for your service to the country. It's incredible. Dre Popov and Frank Riviera.
Yeah, thank you very much, man.
Appreciate it so much. Is it Rivera or Riviera?
Rivera.
Rivera. I want to make sure I say it correctly.
I appreciate it, man.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you being here. And guys, we continue to honor our veterans and the many who are going above and beyond to help service members. So I want you to check out this interview with the NASCAR great Kurt Busch. He's launching a new project to show his appreciation, and I caught up with him recently, so take a listen. You know, you've won so many times, and I'm always curious, each time you win, does it feel different? Does it feel special?
It does. There's so many different ways that wins happen. You know, with teamwork, of course, the pit crew can push you out in front of everybody, or it could just be that you found the right drafting partner at a restrictor plate race. So there's so many different ways to win. The first win is always the most special. It's because I finally broke through, you know, and you made it into the big time. And then my most recent win, 31 of them later, I beat my little brother.
Your brother, Kyle.
So a head-to-head race, neck and neck, and got to beat him. And over the years, though, I felt like early in my career, it was about me.
Yes.
And then now I feel like it's obviously respecting the teamwork and knowing the amount of effort that it goes into winning these races. it's tough, and
Yes.
you got to have the full team effort.
What moment sticks out to you the most? You have Daytona in 2017. You have your first win in 2004. Is there one that just you think about and you're like, oh my gosh, this is like the event that, you know, marks my entire career?
You know, those two are kind of like the Golden Gate Bridge in a sense for me, where you have to work your way up and get to that peak. And then I didn't keep it at that plateau. I needed to. And there's some great wins in there at different road courses, other short tracks. And then to come back up and win Daytona on that portion of my career, it made me appreciate all the other things that much more so.
After 20 years, you've been doing it for such a long time. What do you enjoy about it the most?
It's hard to pinpoint the most, but there's so many things, like the social side of it, racing at the track with my brother. The fans have been incredible all these years. The new engineers, the new crew members, and teaching them some of my old ways, but also my experience level. I really get a joy out of helping them grow and mature as crew members, and fitting into that leadership role more so now than just that young gun that just shot from the hip and just went for it.
One thing that I really love that you do for a lot of your races is you give out these Army veteran tickets to people who they don't have to pay when they come, right?
Yes.
So tell me about that, because I think it's incredible.
Yeah, I started a program. I was talking with the president of NASCAR about our TV viewership or fans in the grandstands and sponsorship, and we joked around, and I just said it's about butts and seats. And that's almost like a military term of boots on the ground. And I bought 100 tickets for every race for our military veterans and current service members. It's available to them on vettix.org.
Wow.
They know where to go get the tickets. There's 100 there available. Tracks have doubled up to 200. Race fans have donated more for more of our military to be able to come to the track for free and enjoy NASCAR.
Incredible, right? And shout out to all of our vets, and shout out to a vet that's a special friend of the show, Rex Lavaris. All right, guys, continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. And then you can check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. And I'll see you tomorrow.